I'm not someone who usually holds a grudge. I've built my life on keeping things professional, moving forward, focusing on the work not the drama. But this was different. Because the person who mocked me wasn't a stranger or a competitor. It was my own cousin, at Easter, in front of my entire family. Growing up, I was always the quiet one, the studious kid who liked spreadsheets more than sports. While the rest of my cousins were into football, parties, and weekend road trips, I was the kid researching business models and teaching myself Excel formulas for fun. They used to tease me about it, of course. Called me the future accountant, or Mr. Numberman. I let it roll off my back. It didn't matter to me then. And honestly, it still wouldn't if it hadn't been for what happened last Easter. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I'd built something real. I launched a logistics consulting firm with nothing but a hand-me-down laptop and a drive that wouldn't quit. I didn't have backing, no wealthy investors, no family, connections, just grit, coffee, and long nights. The first few years were rough. I worked 80-hour weeks, lived off instant ramen, put every cent back into the business. But eventually, it clicked. A few big contracts later, my firm was turning a strong profit. I was consulting for mid-sized companies, managing supply chains, and making more than I ever thought I would at that age. But I didn't flaunt it. I still lived below my means. Still drove the same reliable car. My idea of a splurge was upgrading from the economy seat to exit row. That's what made what happened so frustrating. Because my success didn't come with fanfare, and people like my cousin Brett, they only respect what they can see. Brett has always been the loud one, the center of attention guy. He got into real estate right after college. He posts about hustle culture and seven-figure potential while driving around in leased BMWs. His Instagram is full of luxury rentals he doesn't own and motivational quotes he didn't write. My parents always said, he's just trying to make it. I never said anything. I figured it wasn't my place to judge. But then came Easter. The whole family was together at Grandma's house. Same place we'd gathered every year since we were kids. Same smell of baked ham and lemon cake. Same mismatched chairs around the folding table. There was comfort in that routine, until Brett decided to hijack the peace. I was in the kitchen, helping Grandma plate the desserts, when I heard him. His voice carried across the room like it always did. So what is it you do again? He asked me, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Something with trucks or spreadsheets or, I don't know. Still working from your little laptop. I have to move. Looked up, caught off guard. The room had gone quiet. I gave him a tight smile. I run a logistics consulting firm. Brett chuckled. So, spreadsheets. Got it. A few people laughed. Not because it was funny, but because Brett made everything sound like a joke. He always had that way of making people feel small without being outright rude. That day it stung more than usual. Actually, I said calmly, we just expanded into international freight. I'm working on a supply chain optimization model for a company in the Netherlands. He blinked. That wasn't the answer he expected. Huh, fancy. Then he added, well, hey, someone's got to do the behind-the-scenes stuff, right? Well, the rest of us are out there building empires. That was the punchline. That was what got the bigger laugh. I bit my tongue. I wasn't about to start a scene in Grandma's living room over Brett's need to peacock. But Grandma, blessed her, heard everything. She didn't say a word right then, just handed me a plate and smiled. After dinner, as everyone started migrating toward the couches, she called me back into the kitchen. I've been meaning to ask, she said, lowering her voice. You still working with those factories overseas? Yeah, I nodded. We just signed a new client in Rotterdam. She smiled like she knew something I didn't. Good, I was worried. I'd have to start following Brett on Instagram for business advice. I couldn't help but laugh, but that wasn't the moment. Not yet. The moment came later that evening, when we were all gathered around the fire pit in her backyard. It had become a tradition: coffee, cake, and stories outside under the stars. Brett was holding court again, talking about a multifamily flip he was supposedly closing. He dropped names, talked about developers, made it sound like he was one signature away from becoming a mogul. Then Grandma spoke. Brett, you remember? That little property on Elm Street, the one your uncle used to rent out. He paused. Yeah, the duplex. Well, it needed a new logistics partner for the company that just bought it. Guess who's handling that? He shrugged. She smiled, looked straight at me. This guy. Brett blinked. Then she added, you know, you could learn something from your cousin. He built something solid, quiet, reliable. That's what real success looks like. The air shifted. It wasn't just about logistics or spreadsheets anymore. It was about validation, recognition, from the one person whose opinion actually carried weight in this family. Brett didn't say anything after that. Not to me, anyway. He spent the rest of the night on his phone. I didn't gloat. I didn't spike the football. But inside, something settled. For years, I'd been the one they all overlooked. The quiet cousin with the laptop and the boring job. But Grandma, she saw me. She knew what I was building. And she made sure everyone else knew too. That Easter taught me something I'll never forget. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to prove yourself to people who only value noise. And sometimes, the best revenge is Grandma backing you up in front of the whole family. After that Easter dinner, things quieted down a bit between me and Brett. He didn't say much to me after Grandma shut him down in front of everyone. And honestly, I was okay with that. I wasn't trying to compete with him, I never was. But the truth is, people like Brett only respect power when it smacks them in the face. And mine had finally done that. A few months passed. I buried myself back into work. Things were busier than ever. My firm had landed 2 new overseas clients, and I was finalizing terms on a major acquisition, a struggling third-party logistics firm in the Midwest. It had solid infrastructure but poor management. The kind of company that could thrive with the right direction. We'd been negotiating the deal for months. I was planning to absorb their team, evaluate who was adding real value, and restructure from the inside out. It was all business, clinical, numbers-driven. I never imagined it would tie back to Brett. But life has a funny way of looping your past into your present, especially when egos are involved. I was in a meeting with my operations lead one Thursday, when her voice got real quiet mid-sentence. She'd been scrolling through a list of regional managers we'd inherited in the acquisition, and then she said, "Wait, is this guy your cousin?" I leaned in to look. Sure enough, there he was. Brett listed as Regional Client Engagement Manager. I blinked. I hadn't even known what company he worked for, and now here he was. On my payroll, well, temporarily. I didn't say anything to him. We had standard procedures for acquisitions. All existing staff were placed under review. No one got fired blindly, but no one got a free pass either. Every employee was evaluated based on performance reports, client feedback, and internal interviews. And Brett, let's just say the reviews weren't glowing. He'd had 4 client complaints in the last 6 months. One major account nearly dropped the company because of him, and internally, he was known for being charismatic but unreliable. That was corporate speak for someone who could charm a room but never followed through on deliverables. I didn't make the final call. That's not how I run my business. But my leadership team unanimously flagged him as a redundancy. A week later, he got the email. Terminated. Severance per contract. Benefits through the end of the month. Standard corporate farewell. I figured that was the end of it. I assumed he'd raged to his friends, maybe post a cryptic Instagram quote, and move on to his next hustle. But I was wrong. He reached out. The message came late at night, a long rambling text. It started with, "Hey man, didn't realize you were the one who bought us out," and ended with a favor request. He wanted help finding a new role. He said things like, "You know my work ethic, and we're family, right?" As if none of what happened before mattered. As if Easter never happened. As if he hadn't mocked my career for years. I just sat there staring at my screen. I didn't know whether to laugh or get angry, but mostly, I felt numb, because I'd worked so hard to build something that was rooted in professionalism, in integrity, in keeping business and personal matters separate. And now, here was my own cousin, who publicly treated my work like a joke, suddenly recognizing its value, the moment it could benefit him. I didn't respond right away. I needed to process it. The next morning, I talked to my mentor, a retired executive who'd guided me through some of my firm's toughest decisions. I asked him, "What would you do?" He said something that stuck with me. He said, "Sometimes, people only see your worth when they're standing in your shadow, but that doesn't mean you owe them your light." That was all I needed to hear. I drafted a short response. "Hey Brett, I hope you land on your feet." The transition team handled all staffing decisions independently based on internal performance metrics. "I wish you the best going forward." It was short, professional, clean. He read it within minutes. No reply. But then came the second wave. Taught his mom and called my mom. Said I was being cold, that I could have thrown him a bone. Said I was turning into a corporate robot. That hit differently because I hadn't told anyone about Brett's track record. I hadn't told them he was barely holding onto that role before we even stepped in. I hadn't mentioned the client issues, the late reports, the missed follow-ups to them. He was just trying, and I was the successful cousin who wouldn't help. That narrative was easier for them to accept than the truth. That Brett was charming, but careless, ambitious, but unreliable, and I had no obligation to cover for that. Still, it hurt. No one likes being painted as the villain in their own family, but I reminded myself I wasn't punishing him. I wasn't lashing out. I was holding the same standard I applied to everyone else. I'd built my company on discipline, structure, and accountability. I wasn't about to jeopardize that for someone who only respected me when he needed something. That week, my mom asked me if I'd reconsider. She said, "I know he's made mistakes, but maybe just help him with a referral." "You're in a position to do that," I told her. "I'm also in a position to protect what I've built." That was the end of that conversation. A few days later, Brett updated his LinkedIn. Something vague about exploring new opportunities and seeking a company that values innovation. The usual fluff. But behind the scenes, I knew he was struggling. My contacts in the industry shared that he'd reached out, name-dropping me, trying to leverage our connection. I didn't say anything. I didn't interfere. But I did make one thing clear to my team. We promote based on performance, not proximity. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. Because sometimes, the hardest line to draw is with the people who share your blood. You want to believe they'll treat you with the same respect you give them. But when they don't, when they only show up with their hands out and not their sleeves rolled up, you have to step back and let them figure it out on their own. That was the moment I realized I wasn't the quiet cousin anymore. The one they overlooked at holidays. I was the one they called when they needed help. And that meant it was time to protect my peace and my platform, even from family. I wish I could say things settled down after I drew the line with Brett. After I politely declined to help him find another job, I assumed he'd get the message, that we'd both move on and go our separate ways. But I underestimated just how deep his entitlement really ran. It started with a message from a friend of mine, Jason. He runs a mid-sized import-export firm in Seattle. We'd collaborated a couple of times on international logistics routes. Good guy, straight shooter. We weren't close, but we respected each other professionally. He messaged me out of the blue. Hey man, quick question. Do you know a Brett? Hamilton says he's your cousin and worked under you for a while. The moment I saw that, my stomach dropped. I asked Jason what Brett had told him. He replied, he said he was part of your logistics strategy team during your recent acquisition, that you mentored him and called him one of your top regional leads. I stared at my screen, completely stunned. That was not just a lie, it was a complete fabrication. Brett hadn't been mentored. He hadn't been part of any strategic discussions. He was terminated due to underperformance. The only interaction I'd had with him during the acquisition was seeing his name in a staff review spreadsheet and sending a short, respectful reply when he texted asking for help. So I responded to Jason, keeping it diplomatic. Brett is my cousin, yes, but I had no working relationship with him. His name came up during our acquisition, and our internal team made a staffing decision based on performance records. That's all. Jason's reply was short. Got it? Thanks for the clarity. Thought something felt off. That should have been the end of it, right? But of course, it wasn't, because the next week, Brett got hired by a different company in our network, a supplier based in Texas that we'd recently started on. I wasn't involved directly, but one of my managers flagged it during a partner call. Isn't that your cousin? He just emailed our client onboarding rep and mentioned your name again. My jaw clenched. I asked for the email, and there it was. Brett had written a message saying something like, excited to be working with your firm. My cousin, my full name, spoke very highly of your operations team and suggested we could align well. He's been a huge influence on my career. I sat there, shaking my head. Brett wasn't just using my name, he was building an entirely fictional narrative around it, making it sound like I'd vouched for him, encouraged his hire, practically mentored him into the role. And here's the thing, in our industry, reputation is currency. If a respected consultant says, this person is sharp, that can open doors. Brett knew that. He was banking on the assumption that I wouldn't find out, or if I did, I'd just let it go to avoid drama. But what he didn't realize is, I don't protect people who lie. I reached out directly to the company's director of operations, a woman named Elise. I'd met at a supply chain summit the year prior. We weren't close friends, but we'd worked on a cross-border compliance webinar and kept in occasional contact. I called her and asked to clarify something. I said, did Brett Hamilton reference me during your hiring process? She sighed. He did. Said you were family and had mentored him. He listed your firm on his resume, actually. I was quiet for a moment before responding. I need to be clear. Brett worked for a company I acquired. He was let go shortly after due to poor performance. We never worked together directly. I did not mentor him, and I definitely never gave him permission to use my name as a reference. She was quiet too. Then she said, that explains a lot. Turns out, Brett had already started causing issues in his first few weeks. Missed deadlines, disorganized communication, inflated promises to clients he couldn't back up. One of her senior project leads had even emailed Brett a list of on-tasks and got a reply that accidentally CC'd the wrong recipient. That recipient, a friend of Brett's, the message read, these people are so uptight, bro. I'll charm them until I get what I want, then ghost. Just padding the resume for now. Yeah, that email got flagged. Elise saw it, and with my call, it confirmed what they'd already started to suspect. Brett was a fraud. She thanked me for the honesty, told me they'd be reviewing his status internally, and said she appreciated the professionalism. I didn't need to hear what happened next. I could already guess. 2 days later, I got a passive-aggressive text from Brett. So I guess you're out here sabotaging me now. I didn't even reply, because the truth was, I hadn't sabotaged anything. I didn't send in a complaint. I didn't warn people off. All I did was tell the truth. And he couldn't handle that. Brett had built a house of lies using my name as the foundation, and, when it started to crumble, he wanted to blame the architect. But I wasn't the one who brought him down. He did that all by himself. A week passed, then another. And then I got a message from his sister. She told me Brett was going through a hard time, and that he felt like no one in the family was supporting him. She asked if I'd consider having a heart-to-heart. I told her, I'm always open to conversations, but I don't reward dishonesty. He didn't just stretch the truth, he tried to rewrite my career as part of his. She didn't reply. After that. The sad part, I actually don't hate Brett. I feel sorry for him, because somewhere along the line, he started believing that appearances mattered more than substance. That a flashy title or fake referral could replace the real thing. Work ethic, humility, growth. And I realized, this was never about rivalry. It was about someone trying to cut corners and expecting me to hand him the scissors. That email, it didn't just expose his lies to a new employer. It exposed them to me. It showed me that no matter how much success I earn, there will always be people trying to grab onto it without doing the work. So I made a decision that day. I added a new rule to my firm's referral policy. No family references, ever. No exceptions. It might seem harsh, but it's necessary. Because trust isn't about bloodlines, it's about integrity. And in this business, that's everything. I thought things would die down after Brett got caught lying his way into that job. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd get the message that I was done playing cleanup crew for his messes. But I should have known better. What I didn't expect was to get a letter, a real one, certified, from a lawyer. At first I thought it was a mistake. Then I read the name, Brett Hamilton versus my name. The document accused me of deliberately sabotaging his career prospects, interfering with private employment contracts, and causing emotional distress due to defamatory communications. In plain English, he was suing me for telling the truth. I stared at the paper for a long time. My first reaction wasn't even anger, it was disbelief. I thought, is this really happening? The guy lies his way into a company, gets exposed because of his own stupid email, and now I'm the villain. I immediately called my attorney Philip. You remember him? Been my legal guy for years. Sharp as a blade, no patience for nonsense. When I explained what was going on, he laughed. Not just a chuckle, full laugh. He said, I've seen petty, I've seen foolish. But this is a new species of dumb. Still, we didn't take it lightly. We reviewed the paperwork, gathered timelines, emails, call records. But we both knew the real problem wasn't legal, it was Brett's sense of entitlement. And I had a bad feeling that this was just the opening move in a bigger play. Turns out, I was right. About a week later, I get a text from my old landlord Judith. She managed the property where Brett used to stay after getting hired at that Texas firm. She sounded stressed. Double quotes, hey, just a heads up. Your cousin showed up here with a U-Haul and a guy claiming to be a moving crew. He says you've approved access to clear out belongings? I was floored. I hadn't spoken to Brett in weeks. I sure as hell hadn't approved anything. I asked Judith to hold off and not let anyone touch a thing until I confirmed what was going on. Then, 2 hours later, I got a message from Philip, a scanned letter from Brett's lawyer, claiming Brett had possessions stored in a jointly used apartment and that he was initiating recovery action. The letter referenced furniture, electronics, even appliances, some of which I knew for a fact Brett had never owned. Now I was angry. See, the apartment was mine, everything in it bought and paid for by me. Brett had never lived there. At most, he'd crashed on my couch for 3 nights 2 years ago when he was in town for some half-baked business meeting. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a setup, so I hired a moving company, not to move his stuff but to inventory mine. Philip helped me draft a document listing every item in the apartment, complete with receipts. We scheduled an official move-out. My goal was simple: remove every trace of Brett from my space, professionally and legally. We even agreed to let his lawyer be present just to keep it clean. The day of the move-out, the movers arrive right on time. I stay hands-off. Philip's there. We've got security cameras running. Everything is smooth until Brett shows up. Not alone. He's brought another guy. Some fake smiling, buttoned-up type, trying way too hard to look like he belongs. Brett introduces him as his personal representative. Yeah, okay. Right away, they start making noise about shared property. Brett points at my TV, my coffee table, even my sound system, says, these were acquired during our family collaborations. I have rights. Philip doesn't even blink. He pulls out a thick folder of receipts and says, actually, no. Every item you're pointing at is in my client's name, purchased on his card, shipped to his billing address. Do you have any documentation to suggest otherwise? Brett stammers something about verbal agreements. Philip smiles and says, that's not how property law works. The tension builds. The movers keep doing their job, boxing what we've confirmed belongs to me. Brett is clearly getting agitated. Then he makes his move. He and his rep try to walk out with the TV. Just pick it up and start wheeling it toward the elevator, like it's theirs. The lead mover, a huge guy named Colin, calmly steps in their path and says, that item is not on our release list. You'll need to put it down. Brett tries to puff up. Are you a cop? You can't stop me. Colin doesn't move an inch. No, sir. But I am responsible for the contents of this job. If you remove something not listed, I report it as theft. Your call. Philip steps in then, holding his phone. I'll be calling the police now. Attempted removal of non-approved property during a supervised move-out is not just civil, it's criminal. That got their attention. Brett's face went pale. His rep suddenly had somewhere else to be. They dropped the TV, didn't say another word, just stood by the wall while the movers finished packing. At the end, Brett muttered something about being treated like a criminal. Philip handed him a sealed envelope. Inside, a formal notice, cease and desist for defamation. A copy of the property inventory, and a warning that any further attempts to claim shared assets would be considered harassment. They left without a word, but that wasn't the end. A few days later, I got an email from the moving company. One of their crew had taken a photo of the furniture before the move. The wall had scratches, trash was left on the floor, a wine stain on the rug that hadn't been there the day before. I contacted my landlord. She sent me a bill for damages, $1,400, photos included. Guess who'd be footing that? Yep, Brett. Philip forwarded everything, photos, receipts, damage reports to Brett's lawyer. We never heard back. That was it. No court case, no settlement offer, just silence. And that's when it hit me. Brett didn't want justice. He didn't even want stuff. He wanted control, influence, the ability to keep his hand in my life even after I told him no. But this time, I didn't let him. And the best part? I didn't even have to raise my voice. The receipts spoke louder than I ever could. That moment watching him try to walk out with something that never belonged to him, only to be blocked by cold hard facts, was the closure I didn't know I needed. And you know what? It felt good to not be the guy keeping the peace anymore. To let people deal with the consequences of their actions. To draw a line and not flinch when someone tried to cross it. Because sometimes, the strongest statement you can make is saying nothing, and showing them the paperwork instead. After the whole ordeal with Brett fizzled out, I thought I was finally done. I thought the worst was behind me. But there's this thing about people like Amanda. They don't just want to leave. They want to rewrite the ending. And they need an audience for it. I was minding my own business. Rebuilding, quiet mornings, clean space. Work was steady. My gym routine was back. I'd started feeling human again. Then, one day, a friend of mine from college, Leslie, messaged me. Just a quick, "Hey, you should see this." Attached was a screenshot of a private Instagram story. Kayla, my ex, her face filled the frame, eyes red, makeup just slightly smudged, trying to look raw and brave. The caption, "Finally escaping a financially abusive and controlling relationship. The road ahead is terrifying, but I'm grateful for those showing me what real support looks like." #survivor. I felt my stomach drop. Let me be clear. I had never raised my voice at her, never used money to manipulate. I had supported her when she was chasing unpaid internships and curated art dreams that paid nothing. I paid her rent, her car lease, her groceries, because I believed in her. And now, she was publicly painting me as her abuser. I closed the message and stared at the wall for a long time. Part of me wanted to shout. 2 post screenshots, bank statements, timestamps, every credit card bill I ever paid. But the other part, the part that had been through all of this before, knew better. You don't win by fighting lies with noise. You win by letting the truth breathe. So I forwarded it all to my lawyer, Philip. He responded almost instantly. "She's making public defamatory claims. We're drafting a cease and desist, and if it continues, we go civil." It was clear, clean, professional, just like I needed it to be. But even though the legal side was handled, I couldn't shake the hurt. I wasn't embarrassed, just disappointed. Not just in her, but in myself. For once, believing she was someone else, I thought we'd had something real, something hard-earned. But apparently, once the money stopped, so did the storybook. Still, I stayed silent. A week later, the movers came to her old place to retrieve the rest of her things. We'd arranged a fully documented pickup, itemized list, her lawyer on standby. I wasn't there. I didn't want to see her. But the crew told me afterward she came alone. No tears this time. Just cold, quiet, and bitter. She didn't say a word to anyone. Maybe she thought silence would sting. But honestly, it was a relief then. Just when I thought everything had gone quiet, the real twist arrived. Leslie messaged again. Another screenshot. This time, from Facebook. But not from Kayla. From her father. It was a long post. At first I hesitated to read it, but curiosity got the better of me. And as I scrolled, I felt something I hadn't expected. Sadness. This wasn't rage or defense, it was heartbreak. From a dad watching his daughter spiral. He didn't mention me by name, but he didn't need to. He talked about how she'd left someone good, generous, and supportive for a man who promised fast money and big dreams. He said, she walked away from the ladder someone built for her, and chose to chase a mirage. Apparently Russell, the so-called real estate developer she left me for, wasn't what he pretended to be. His lifestyle? Smoke and mirrors. Flashy car, rented suits, and maxed out credit. When the bills came in, and the job offers didn't, things collapsed fast. Kayla lost the Audi, repossessed the apartment. She couldn't afford a single month. The art gallery internship. They quietly let her go after the drama caught up to them. Word gets around in that world. She had made too much noise, burned too many bridges, and earned a reputation for being unstable. Even her friends began to back away. She moved back in with her parents. No car, no internship, no income, just a long trail of scorched earth behind her and her dad. He finally saw her with clear eyes. He wrote, "It breaks my heart to watch her unravel, but choices have consequences. She betrayed someone who never stopped showing up for her." Those words hit me like a freight train, not because I wanted her punished, not even because I felt vindicated, but because they confirmed something I'd suspected for a long time. People will tell the story they need to believe to feel okay. And sometimes, the truth isn't what they want to see until it's too late. That post didn't go viral or anything. It wasn't loud or public, but it reached the right people. People who knew us. People who mattered. And that was enough. I never responded, never posted, never tried to fight fire with fire. Instead, I finished cleaning out the apartment, donated all the furniture to a shelter for families starting over, paid the lease break penalty, closed the last joint account, shut the door on that chapter for good. It felt like breathing again. No noise, no drama, just peace. I focused on my business, my clients, my friends, even started traveling again, and slowly, the weight lifted. I realized I hadn't just survived. Something toxic I had reclaimed my identity. There's this pressure, especially for people who build things, companies, relationships, futures to fix everything, to hold it all together, but some things aren't meant to be held. Some people aren't broken, they just prefer to live in chaos. And it's not your job to rescue them. I don't know what Kayla's doing now. I don't check, I don't care. Russell? Probably chasing the next big shortcut. But me, I'm good. I've learned the value of silence, the strength in boundaries, and the rare peace that comes from letting go not out of anger, but out of wisdom. So if you're listening to this, and you've been burned, lied about, abandoned after doing everything right, let me tell you something. You don't need to explain your side to everyone. The people who matter will see. Eventually, the truth rises. Always, and sometimes. It shows up in the most unexpected way, like a Facebook post from the last person you ever thought would speak up. That, right there, was closure. Not because I needed revenge, but because I finally felt done. The story told itself, and I didn't have to lift a finger.